Just wait until you have a quantum computer that can break that particular encryption code. That's one of the dangers just in general that is out there right now. We take it very seriously.
This is Code and Country with host Ian L. Patterson.
Welcome to today's episode of Code and Country, a podcast focused on the intersection of cybersecurity, national security, and the defense of democratic institutions. Today, we're talking to Manfred Boudreaux-Dehmer. To start, Manfred, could you share a little bit about your career? I'm very curious. You went from working with tech giants like HP and Sierra Wireless to becoming NATO's first ever Chief Information Officer. How did that role even come about?
Well, it's a great question. So, first of all, Ian, it's great to be on this podcast. Very excited to be talking to you. So, in answering your question, I'd been in really private industry my whole life, technology companies, and the last job was in Vancouver, and the year was at that time 2020, and I decided, well, I need to do something else. So let's just, after 11 years at the company I was with, Sierra Wireless, so I decided to look, and I found the NATO job online. Actually, I found it in LinkedIn, and I looked it up and decided to apply, and here I am.
Thank you for listening to Code and Country, sponsored by Plurilock. If you're enjoying this episode, please remember to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast. And now, back to the episode.
What's been the biggest change or surprise maybe from transitioning from the private sector to not only a government institution, but a multi-government institution like NATO?
Yes. Well, what hasn't changed? So the two environments are very, very, very different, as you can imagine. Now, some things are the same. I mean, it's about technology. It's about needing to spend money wisely, right? So whether it's shareholders' money in the private industry or it's nation's money, so there is a responsibility that what we do in IT is the right things, and that's done in a cost efficient manner. But then a lot of things are very different. So the governance structure of NATO is a very interesting structure. So we're, of course, 32 member nations, and many decisions are made by member nations. And whether that's kicking off projects, whether it is the annual budget, so it is nations deciding, and we serve nations. So that's what we do. And how that works is interesting, because NATO operates at a consensus basis. So all 32 need to say yes. If 31 say yes and one says no, it is a no, and you need to go back to the drawing board until you've got a consensus of 32. And as you can imagine, it takes some time to get to that decision. When we decide to kick off a project or do something, it can be a lengthy process. But then on the other hand, while we sometimes think that, why does it take so long? It is also one of NATO's biggest advantages, because a NATO decision is a NATO decision. We're not the United States, where you've got up and down votes and abstentions. No, NATO really continues talking, allies continue talking until everybody's on the same page. And then it is a decision. And so if you look at our prime purpose, which is deterrence and defense, that is hugely important, because NATO then says, this is what the alliance is doing, not half of the alliance or the majority of the alliance. It's really everybody. So that's one of the big differences. And then the whole multicultural environment. I mean, it is 32 nations, so it is a multicultural environment. Whatever we do in two official languages, English and French. So those are just some of the differences that come to mind.
I'm curious also, your position is both the CIO as well as the CISO. How are you finding the balance between needing to innovate, presumably do digital transformation, while also maintaining the requirements for security and cybersecurity?
I think everybody who is at any organization or company who's got a dual mandate faces those challenges, and it's just a matter of you've it's not an or, it is an and. You have to do both, right? You just have to move forward. So at the same time, you got to innovate, you've got to digitally transform, which is very, very important for us. At the same time, you need to move as fast as possible, but not any faster. And that's really where cybersecurity kicks in, and where you need to have the right protection in place. And especially for us, cybersecurity is a huge deal. As you can imagine, we've got lots of threats and people wanting to learn our secrets and so on and so forth. So whatever we do on the cybersecurity side is absolutely balanced with how fast we go on the innovation side and what we do in terms of rolling out new functionality.
I'm curious what the state was when you came in to the organization. I can imagine, as an outside perspective, I can imagine there was probably a whole raft of perhaps different systems. Perhaps things had grown rather than been built. I think I saw in an interview that you had mentioned that the systems really were organically grown IT systems, as opposed to something that was perhaps maybe centralized with a specific architecture. I'm curious, where have you come from, and then where are you going in terms of the overall IT landscape?
Yeah, so we're coming from a very, very decentralized environment. NATO this year will celebrate its 76th birthday, so it is not, the very young organization. So it has a number of years of success on it. It's also very decentralized, very federated in the approach. So we've got the strategic commands, we've got the international headquarters, we've got different agencies and research centers at the NATO enterprise. And so that is essentially a very diverse group of entities that we have. And so the fact that they organically grew over decades means that we do have also a decentralized IT environment. And so I think I linked it to kind of a garden. It's a garden thing. And so what we do is we need to clean up the garden and make sure that we come up with a harmonized strategy. And that is one part of my mandate, to provide coherence to the NATO enterprise, which consists of 57 entities. It's about 25,000 users. And we've got coherence when it comes to enterprise architecture, but also portfolio management, service level delivery, technology choices that we make. And as you can imagine, it is not an easy process, and it's also a lengthy process, because you can't undo what you've done in 76 years from a systems perspective, or whatever number of decades. You can't undo that overnight. And you also need to make sure that current operations and exercises are not impacted in any way. So we're moving carefully but swiftly through the process of rearranging our systems landscape. What helps us with this a great deal is that we have embarked on a digital transformation exercise. And digital transformation for many, many organizations really means a fundamental change in how you do business and how you support the business through technology. Business for us is deterrence and defense. So we need to have systems in place that allow member nations as well as the NATO headquarters to communicate with each other. As part of the Washington Treaty that created NATO, we have a consultation clause in there when allies need to be able to talk to each other at any given point in time. So that's really important for us. The other thing that's important for us is command and control systems on the military side, that we are able to put them together more and more and come up with a harmonized systems landscape. And for us, this means multi-domain operations. So if we take the military domains of air, land, sea, space, and cyber, those are the 5 domains, the more you can integrate them from a situational analysis perspective. And from an IT perspective, the better it will be. And so there is a lot of emphasis that we put on digital transformation, on multi-domain operations, on getting better. So we're using our digital transformation effort that we need to do anyway, because we need to modernize and keep current as an alliance. We use that to make systems changes. So kind of the refresh and the change of business processes in our architecture, we have that on the train of digital transformation.
So I'm really curious. In some government organizations that I've come across, there will oftentimes be a responsibility to secure a network, but they may not actually have the authority to do so, and so their impact is much more limited towards advice and guidance and please do this, but we can't necessarily force you to do this. Should I think about NATO in the same way that you're providing advice, guidance, and requests, but is it the underlying nations who have to then implement those things, or how does that work?
Yeah, so NATO is really a couple of different circles. If you kind of imagine circles where one kind of expands on the other one, on the inner circle is the NATO enterprise, and that's what I mentioned earlier. It is 57 entities. It is the command structure, it is agencies, it is the headquarters, it's the inner part of NATO. Now, we have a lot of leeway as to what we do in that inner part. We're responsible for that. I'm responsible for IT coherence with that. Now, the next layer out is the 32 allies. And the 32 allies are really 32 nations who are sovereign, who are independent, but then at the same time have committed to harmonizing standards, procedures, structures between themselves to make sure that you can operate in a combined fashion, so that really the total output is more than the sum of its parts. That's one of the secrets of NATO, and so secrets to success. And so really what's happening there is that allies come together very frequently and they set standards. And the standards could be anything. Standards could be for equipment. It could be for ammunition. It can be for cloud operating procedures, other IT considerations. So the standard setting is really, really important because you have all of those different nations coming together, wanting to act in one force, and that's where standards are important.
So maybe if I could switch gears a little bit, I'm very curious. I suspect that you have a deep level of insight into what's happening in the world, frankly. And one of the things that I'm always struck by is from a commercial lens. We often see an uptick in cyber attacks that are around physical attacks or kinetic attacks. And so as an example, there was some well publicized reporting around the European energy sector being under attack right around the time that Russia invaded Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how are you seeing the relationship between kinetic warfare, cyber attacks, potentially the bleed over into the commercial sector? What have you seen transpire in your time?
Mm-hmm. I think whatever happens on the geopolitical stage at a certain point has an impact on cyber threats, and therefore has an impact on cyber. So it is certainly kinetic effects that you have just mentioned, but also other geopolitical things. So we really see from the time there is an announcement or the time you see the news that something has happened, and you brought up the Russia's invasion into the Ukraine in 2022, which is really the renewed invasion because Russia went into the Crimea in 2014. So we should not forget that. But everything that happens has an effect on cyber, and it's typically happening very quickly, sometimes even before. And it was an interesting thing with the Ukraine, because the February 24th, 2022, when the renewed aggression happened from Russia to the Ukraine, several days before, there was intelligence out there, and the Americans were very public, really, about the intelligence, warning the world of the impending aggression that Russia had for the Ukraine, and so we saw days before changes in the cyber landscape. So sometimes you see that right around the same time. Sometimes you see it a bit before, but whatever happens in the geopolitical space has an effect on cyber.
So I'm curious if we pull that thread a little bit. Again, if I draw parallels from what we see in the commercial landscape, we often will see threat advisories around specific countries. So I think of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. What are you seeing, I guess, from your vantage point, just with regards to those specific nation state actors? Are there trends that you can draw around particular strategies or techniques that separate them from one another? I mean, if you see, let's say, a large crypto heist, as we saw just in the last couple of weeks, is it easier for you to attribute that to one actor versus another?
There's a couple of different questions in there. So one is, are there other personalities of countries? Are there particular patterns that you could see? And the answer to that is definitely. So what we see from Russia is anything that furthers the agenda that also kinetically Russia has been pursuing for some time. Russia is also a master in the disinformation space. So we've got a lot of analysis that we do at NATO looking at social media, information on social media, and distilling the spread of disinformation, and then also countering it with putting facts out there and educating people about that. But Russia is, in addition to cyber capabilities that they do have a lot of investments in disinformation. China is technically very, very sophisticated. I think 40 of the biggest advanced persistent threat actors, APTs, are in China. There's a lot of technical sophistication in China that we see. And it is more of a, I think more Chinese would be known, the Chinese government, of kind of stealth operations and just operating maybe at a more quiet pace. And you brought up North Korea. So North Korea is all about commercials, and it's really interesting because you can make a direct link to North Korea has been impacted by sanctions for many, many years, and so they do not have the regular income streams that nations would have or that governments would have. And so in the case with North Korea, it's absolutely about commercial activity, and that is ransomware attacks that they are extremely good at, have become over time extremely good at. And I think artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and being able to have just better crafted emails in these topics help there. But then also you brought up a couple of weeks ago the 1.4 billion crypto heist. That was a remarkable thing that North Korea did. And so they've really built up their capabilities in that commercial space to to compensate for the lack of money that they've not been getting.
So you touched on AI, and so maybe we'll pivot over there. I'm very curious. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, again, in the commercial landscapes is that adoption of newer technologies can sometimes be slowed down, particularly for larger enterprises, by concerns around compliance and regulatory impacts of using new technology. But I agree with you. I mean, one of the things that I often remark upon is how good spam and phishing emails have gotten, because even for people where English is not their first language, it's now a lot easier to craft those messages. I'm curious, beyond email attacks or kind of more traditional email-based communications, how else are you seeing AI being adopted, either on the offensive side or on the defensive side?
Mm-hmm. So on the defensive side, we are adopting it quite significantly. And so the biggest use case really of artificial intelligence on the defensive side of cyber is making sense of logs. And so the SIEM applications have been around for quite some time to do correlation of seemingly unconnected events that are happening on the network, and then supporting network analysts and SOC analysts with some trends or with some cases that to follow up with. Now, artificial intelligence has taken that to a new level because it is not only the correlation of various disjointed data points, but is also the accumulation of additional knowledge of then making sure that there's a better and better understanding of what these events mean. And it's really mostly under the umbrella of avoiding false positives, because the false positives, if you've got too many of them, they'll kill you. You'll be chasing things that are really not chase worthy. And with artificial intelligence, you can really narrow down your window of events that you want to look at. That is a use case area that we've been going into quite a bit. There's also, you can take your penetration testing to a whole different level with artificial intelligence. So you can do, instead of just a regular pen test, you can do adversary emulation, where you presume that an attacker has made it into the system, and then you see what the attacker would do, and for the system to learn how these different attack pathways and kill chains would be exploited inside of your system. And you can then see what the different pathways are and the likelihood of different pathways with probability calculation. And then you can take action to protect yourself better, either in the immediate term or in the longer term, from attackers on the specific pathways. So on the blue side, on the defensive side, those are the two big use cases that we have and that we've gotten into. On the red side, everybody's really worried about a surge of attacks that comes with artificial intelligence, and I haven't seen that yet. And it's interesting because we're kind of like all waiting. We know this is going to happen. We know it has happened with what we talked about earlier, ransomware attacks, the kind of getting language to a level where it's easier for people to be tricked. But then at the same time, I've not yet seen artificially constructed attack campaigns to a level where we've been fearing that this would happen. But it'll happen sooner or later. And I think there will be an increase, and that we're partially seeing already, an increase in frequency of just traditional attacks. But then what is still going to come at some point is new attack vectors, and a new way of how cyber attacks would look like.
It's interesting. I think I broadly agree with you. We've seen a couple of things tick up since LLMs became really popular. I think the first is the speed from a 0-day exploit being discovered or announced to it actually being weaponized. And I have to imagine that development aided by large language models have certainly helped to speed up the time from discovery to exploitation. Although, granted, that trend had already been going prior to LLMs coming onto the scene. I think the other one is kind of maybe a more sophistication of the existing attack vectors, which is it's not just a fake email, but now it is a deep fake, potentially voice call, audio call, and certainly claims of deepfake video as well, leading to tens of millions of dollars. And I think, again, largely aided by LLMs. I'm curious if we could maybe stick on that topic of emerging technologies. Do you have a view, or does NATO have a view today on the potential threat and impact of a quantum breakthrough? If we are able to see a quantum computer, be real and be big enough and be leverageable by either nation states or potentially commercial actors. Do you have a point of view on how far away we are from that potential eventuality? Is it an eventuality? Is the jury still out on whether this is a technical possibility or not? I'm just curious your thoughts on quantum.
Mm-hmm. So I think it will happen. I think the being able to break existing cryptography through quantum computers will happen at some point in the future. The thing that a lot of people are concerned about right now is for if you got access to data that may be encrypted and you may not be able to read it, but to take that data and essentially put it on the shelf if you've got access to it, and then just wait until you have a quantum computer that can break that particular encryption code. That's one of the dangers just in general that is out there right now. We take it very seriously. We prepare for it. We've been thinking about this for quite some time. Your question on how long will it take until that day X arrives where quantum computing will be able to break existing cryptography mechanism, nobody knows. So there's estimates that go out there from, as little as 5 years and probably as much as 15 years. So I think we're a bit away. If you look at what's happening with quantum computing, like how hard it is to really to do it, right? It's just technically speaking, it's not a very easy thing to do. And there's a number of companies out there that are at the forefront of research, and they're really pushing this very hard. But just overall, I think it's not quite as easy and as imminent as some people think. Now, at the same time, we need to do the right thing and need to prepare for it and need to do that very fast, which we're doing. But let me ask the question back to you. What's your estimate as far as number of years is concerned, Ian?
Well, it's a good question. Q-Day, right? Quantum Q-Day, I think, is measured in years away. I don't think it's months, nor do I think it's decades. I think it's some number of years. Is it a small number of years or a large number of years? It's hard to say. I actually look more at what other organizations are doing. It's not just about whether I have a crystal ball and think Q-Day is 2 years away or 5 years away or eight years away. I'm actually more interested in what are organizations doing today, because actions actually tell more than words do. And so the actions that we are seeing is that quantum preparedness, I think up until the last 24 months, was largely the realm of signals intelligence agencies and central banks and maybe a handful of the top financial institutions in the world. Those organizations have always been looking at this because it's such a monstrous threat to those organizations' respective missions. Now what we're seeing is we're starting to have the conversation with commercial companies, with smaller financial institutions, with more broadly public sector clients, not just intelligence community, around what does quantum preparedness mean? What should we be doing now? How should we be thinking about this? The interesting analogy that I heard just recently is actually a comparison to the Y2K bug, which was perhaps this is much to do about nothing. However, very large projects were spun up to make sure that there was nothing, to make sure that there was no large impact. So I think for most organizations, most enterprise organizations that are doing traditional enterprise risk management, it seems like the consensus is that quantum, the ability for a quantum computer to break traditional encryption and cryptography, potentially a very significant impact, potentially still a low likelihood, at least in the next year or two. And therefore, the actions that I see these organizations take are commensurate with that assessment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting analogy to link it to Y2K, because in Y2K, and I'm old enough to remember, and I was working a big project for Compaq Computers at that time. That was before the merger between Compaq and HP. And we did a lot of work on Y2K. So I think a lot of things, especially if you had a 2-digit year, you knew this thing was going to break because it'll be 00, and therefore it would just not be as large a number as the year 99. So a lot of work was done to deal with it. But then the big question in the end was, okay, but the very core of the operating system, the very part of the processor that deals with time, how will that affect it? And there, I think we got lucky, because I do remember waiting with bated breath at midnight on December 31st, 1999, to kind of see what happens. And then it was this anticlimactic feeling that nothing really has happened, but lots of work had to be done. And I think it's also the same with crypto and quantum resistant cryptography, that you need to think about it, and you need to do quite a bit of work, like the new crypto standards that are now being developed, in order for that then to be a non-event. And so hopefully the same thing will hold true, that it's going to be a non-event. We don't know when Q-Day will come. I think your estimate is a bit on the, maybe a bit more front loaded than some of the other ones, but it'll be interesting to see what will happen.
Well, interesting. Just in regards to Y2K, I was too impatient. I actually I changed the clock. I changed the clock date early on my, I think, 486 SX. Wait a minute, at 486 DX to actually see what was going to happen. And it was, I think, the technical term around that time was a nothing burger. So that's what my memory serves.
Yes.
Maybe just to wrap up, I think you are somebody who has a ton on their plate. I'm actually